Well, why don't we get started? Thank you so much for joining us for this program. My name is Michelle Rapp, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy in the Alumni Relations Office. So I put on career programs like this one, trying to address lots of different career topics for all career stages and various industries. And I'm happy that you're joining us today, and I'm super excited about our panel of alumni. I've had the pleasure of meeting all of them over the last couple of years in different capacities, and I think all of them have a really interesting career path, wonderful accomplishments, and a lot of insight as they navigated their direction. So our goal for today is to hear from them. I'm hoping that you will, one, have fun, that you'll get some inspiration from hearing about their journeys, and also that you get some learning for yourself about maybe a different perspective or things that will help you as you go forward, and the chance to engage in conversation with each other and to ask questions and connect with the Northeastern community. So our format is that we will start off with introductions from our four panelists, Cassie, Rima, Zach, and Shane, hear a bit about their journeys, and then we'll move into a 20-minute breakout session where you'll be able to choose one room with each of one of them, and then come back for a large group discussion. And so I'm going to turn it over to Cassie, who was the first one to join us, and to get started.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for joining. My name is Cassie Choi. I am a 2013 grad out of Bouvet in the School of Nursing. I am from right outside Boston in Nashua, New Hampshire. I am now based in San Francisco. So a little bit about my path. Like I said, I'm a registered nurse. I worked in Beth Israel in the emergency room. After I graduated, I moved to New York City and worked in cardiac critical care nursing at New York Presbyterian in Washington Heights. Then I moved to San Francisco and worked at Kaiser and UCSF in critical care, but I was really frustrated with the way the healthcare system worked. So I moved over to startups, very popular in San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. But it was very happenstance. I actually just quit my job after doing it multiple times out of being really frustrated with the hospital systems that I was working for. And when I quit UCSF, I got a LinkedIn request from a recruiter that was working for a brand new startup that was still in stealth mode, and they were looking for a nurse to draw blood. And when I showed up, they were really just still trying to figure out what they were doing. And so I came on full time and built out clinical operations and a remote care team, and built out an EMR and workflow management system on the product team. And they turned out to be Forward, which is actually President Son's company that is now nationwide. So I was an early employee there. Did it again in another startup out of Y Combinator, digital primary care startup called Circle Medical. Brought them through a fundraise, and then decided to actually start my own company. So I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Pear Team. We are a remote care team, tech-enabled care team, both administrative services and clinical services of nurse practitioners that do telemed services, specifically for community health centers, so FQHCs, rural independent primary care practices, specifically serving Medicaid and underserved patient populations to really help enable them in value-based contracts, really helping to reduce total costs of care. So lots of career pivots, and really excited to talk to you guys more about navigating post-grad career.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Shane.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shane Lloyd, and I am a graduate of the College of Arts and Sciences from the class of 2008. Can everyone hear me okay? Never know with tech issues. Let's see, what shall I share? So I currently work at Amazon I just recently shifted teams. So I was previously on the team that was Worldwide Consumer, which is the retail supply chain logistics operations part of the business. And now I'm actually working in the Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion arm, which serves the entire enterprise. And when I think of how I arrived at a place like Amazon starting with a degree in behavioral neuroscience, the kind of trajectory was when I was an undergrad, I was president of the Black Student Association, very actively involved in communities of color, also involved as a resident assistant. So really caring about communities and creating spaces for people to engage in identity development and also group development of communities. And then ended up going into public health after undergrad and actually helped launch the NU in Greece program back all the way in 2008. And in fact, at Amazon, there are 2 other people who have also lived in Greece, participated in the NUN program, and we're all at Amazon, which is really random. And then afterwards, ended up going to get a Master's of Public Health at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And what I appreciated about public health was just thinking about systems frameworks and social determinants of health, and how do we actually create structures and environments that allow people to access there and have opportunity to achieve their optimal health status. So that systems thinking was super interesting. And then I wanted to publish my research articles, but in order to do that, I needed to like stay in Providence. So I took a quote unquote temporary job in higher education, working in student affairs at a multicultural center, and then actually ended up liking it a ton. And where it augmented my thinking around public health was, how do we actually develop the facility to have conversations around social systems of identity and social systems of oppression, like racism, classism, sexism, and the like. And I found that to be a really, really powerful entry point to thinking about systems level diversity, inclusion, capacity building, and the like. So I stayed in higher education for a while and then pivoted into DEI consulting for Fortune 500 companies, and then ended up landing at, one of the largest companies in all the land, which still offers lots of abundant opportunity for consulting. That's all, and that's my story. Did I miss anything as part of introductions?
That's great. Lots of turns and pivots there. That I love how there can be so many things that are unexpected. All right, Rima.
Hey, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Rima. I'm based in San Diego, California. Went to Northeastern a few years ago and graduated in human services, where I did a specialization in community health, which is one of the independent specializations you can customize. Also minored in health sciences and global social entrepreneurship. So I feel very happy to say I think I'm a merger of like what Cassie and Shane kind of talked about between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also public health and community health. So I'm not clinical in background. My second co-op was actually at the Fenway Institute at Fenway Health. So that was kind of my dose of being on the more clinical side of HIV research and recruitment for different clinical trials, and kind of got a dose of what it's like to work at a community health center, especially one of the biggest ones in New England that focuses on LGBTQ+ health and healthcare, which was very passionate for me. I was part of the Pan-Asian American Queer Alliance while I was at Northeastern. And then my first co-op was actually at IHI, which is the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and still actually at IHI. So I co-opted there quite some time ago, rejoined as a project coordinator, made to project manager, recently senior project manager. And while at IHI, I currently manage the USAID cooperative agreement called Mamoni, which is a maternal and neonatal health project in Bangladesh. So that's currently my biggest project at IHI. I've also worked on our Africa team, so doing a lot of work in maternal and neonatal health and public health projects, specifically around quality improvement efforts. But I've also worked on IHI's design team. So that's working on doing like coaching, QI capacity building with staff members, teaching things like the psychology of change and how do you elicit systems change when there's institutional racism, different layers of racism at organizations. So a lot of coaching all in that, and working on different like equity and inclusion efforts within health and healthcare. But overall, I think that's kind of a little snapshot here. So happy to chat about whatever piques your interest. And I also work in a pro bono fashion as the marketing director for Fueling Justice Coalition. So a whole host of this and that, but really excited to see who else is on the line and also hear from Zach next.
Hey everyone, I'm Zach Williamson. I live in Teal Square, just outside of Davis in Somerville. I did not stray very far from campus. I graduated from College of Arts, Media and Design 2013. My focus at Northeastern was actually in media production. I was a communications major. I did my first co-op with the New England Conservatory working in their marketing department, doing more documentary filmmaking, working with their team to tell the stories of the students. I sort of tripped and fell into the world of startups out of that, is the best way I can describe it. And I've worn a lot of different hats since then, working both in the marketing side, acquisition marketings, and first at a company called Custom Made, helping sell custom jewelry and furniture over the internet. Then working at a company called The Grommet, which was still in the vein of e-commerce, but more on the business development and finding new partners in the supply chain side. Then moving into more of the account management and actual supply chain management. And now I work at a different company called Inside Squared, which is no longer in consumer goods, but now in SaaS, software as a service. So tech startup focused on revenue intelligence and providing a broader, more in-depth reporting tool that connects with CRMs like Salesforce or Bullhorn or HubSpot. So having started thinking I wanted to go to film school, and now working as a customer success manager in a high growth tech company has been an interesting journey. I think the storytelling of advocating for customers and educating them through various products or motions has been a really interesting connecting thread. So it's been an interesting kind of stumbling through different careers and making pretty hard pivots along the way. So I'm excited to, like as the others have said, share what little insight I have and build off of the things that they've accomplished in their career so far.
Thank you. Thank you all. Such interesting stories. And it's interesting, there's a lot of overlap of certain themes and even industry exposure when it was just, I was picking people that I thought had interesting stories, but wasn't even thinking about some of the overlaps there. So I'm curious, when you look back on your experiences, a lot of you made unusual pivots and directions. Like what, I think things might be different than you expected when you started out in your career. What advice do you have from the decisions that you made along the way?
I think for me, I was really following a gut frustration that was deep down inside of me, and just not being afraid to take a risk of quitting my job, despite this, my parents were my dad's an immigrant, and he always said a job is for stability and providing a life. And for me, I was more about following a passion. And so I was okay quitting a job and figuring out what was next, and using my skills to follow that passion. And so in the beginning, it was building from one co-op to the next and saying that's not really the right fit for me of my skills and interests. And then it was building from that to saying that my skill sets don't match the passions that I'm having. And it just evolved from there. And so not necessarily knowing what was next, but not being afraid to say no before I knew what was next.
It's not always so easy to do.
Yeah, just to layer on to what Cassie said, I think for me, when I first did my first co-op at IHI, I think it was back at the second year of college, I remember being quality improvement, I don't know much about this. Also, I was working in the customer service department, so it was this is not what I want to do long term, but the connections that I made were so important. And I really was listening to actually Lisa Warsh's advice about transferable skills, because that was something we really honed in on during our co-op class. And it still sticks with me today, because when I review resumes for potential new co-ops or new hires on our teams, I kind of just skim over some of the education portions. And I'm okay, what did this person actually do? And what did they try that could really work well? Because project management in healthcare is great, but as an umbrella, I didn't really understand until I really got in the nitty gritty how useful the skills of project management would be, because it taught a lot about coaching, relationship management, all these things that I just did not associate with doing PM work before have made it so much, it's made the world bigger to me. It's made like looking at opportunities that I might not have been interested in more interesting, or at least something I would actually click on and actually give it a chance to talk to the recruiter or talk to someone who's at the organization.
I think transferable skills is a really good point. It's also the people in your network as you especially work in either high turnover or high change industries where people are moving between companies or moving between industries. Those people become your biggest advocates and oftentimes the ones that tap you on the shoulder to make the jump between different places. At least I've found in my career that the times that I've switched either major industries or major companies has been when somebody says, I know that you can do that based on the time that we worked together. Here's a whole different thing on paper, but really it's the same skills, just with a different title. And that has been the biggest push for me that I found is both the people and the transferable skills.
I think to build on that, Zach, like one thing that's really important is to just always say yes to opportunities to meet people and to be always learning new skill sets, because you never know how transferable they are and how they build on each other and who those people can introduce you to or see opportunities in you as you build on things. Like just because you like have an interview or meet somebody doesn't mean you have to like actually like take the job, but you never know that when they're explaining what the job is, what it might spark for another idea for something else. And I think like that recruiter who reached out, like she didn't tell me what the company was or what I was going to do, but I was like, I'll go for a free coffee. And like it turned into this whole other career path for me. And so I always tell people just say yes, because you never know what's going to happen in that conversation or who that person is and what they can teach you.
Yeah, definitely too, when you're in those roles, once you've entered into a company too, saying yes to new opportunities internally is a cool way to really expand and move quickly into different places that you're otherwise really unqualified for. But if you've built trust previously, you can make big jumps diagonally, internally, things like that with advocates that already have your back.
I think as a manager too, like now that I'm a manager, we really don't think about titles as much. I think some companies care a lot about titles, but it turns out that titles don't really matter as much as responsibilities and the career growth that happens when you have the right responsibilities and tracking within the company and matching people to opportunities within the company. So I always tell people like, don't care or like, don't hold so tightly to what title when you're like trying to like envision this path in your life, in your career. When you're looking to a new opportunity, look at what the responsibilities are and the opportunities for growth within a career within that company. Like when you go to the interview, talk about like what have other people done within the company, what are your goals as a company, and how can I contribute towards those opportunities for the company. Those are what's more important. And when as a manager, when someone comes into an interview and they're talking more about like what are your OKRs as a company, what are the things that have to happen over the next 1 to 2 years, and how are my skill sets going to contribute towards that, and what are the learning opportunities that I can have and be exposed to at this company. Those are the more interesting people to me. And it's less about like, what is the title that I'm going to get on my resume?
How do you, like Cassie, you just feel like you've had this very open mindset. How do you get there, or how does someone get there if that's not how they're thinking about things?
I don't know.
Any of you can respond.
Yeah, I want to like create space for other people too. I think some people are just like more open to risk than others. And I think once you take risk once and it works out, you feel more open to risk. But I think it's okay to fail sometimes too. Like I was a travel nurse like for a couple of years as a way to explore different hospital systems. Like I realized that I took a job that was like supposed to be like the top hospital, and I thought it was going to be like my dream job. Like I said, like title and like company, like don't always chase that, because it turns out it's not always the best thing. And I was like, maybe like you kind of have to be creative. right? Like travel nursing is this way to be like a consultant to hospitals without having to like tie yourself to a pension and all the like politics that come along with working for like as being an employee. So I became a travel nurse, and one of the contracts that I got, I took a risk on, and the hospital was not great. They really set me up to fail. And so I had to like get myself out of it. And so take risks and just be aware of your surroundings, and, you know, be aware of how to get yourself out of things as you take risks. But really, like, the world opens up to you when you take risks and say yes to opportunities. If you know what your goals are. I always say, like, know what pisses you off about the world, because when you're like pursuing your passions, it doesn't feel like work as much, and you start to realize like what matters to you. Someone interviewed me one time for something, and they asked me this question of like, if you were on your deathbed and you looked back on your life, what metric would you use to define success in your life? And I think that question can be answered differently for everybody. But once you figure out how you answer that question, it's amazing how your life starts to like align when you look backwards. And as you have these forks in front of you, it makes it really easy to decide how to like make those decisions and take risks.
Thank you. You know, Shane, I was curious about when I think about myself having worked in higher ed and then being at Amazon, those are really different settings. I'm just curious about your perspective working in different and public health, like just all these different places that you've been.
Sure. So I think that actually, to get to the previous question, one of the things around open-mindedness, in addition to kind of having some open-mindedness and malleability for your own experience, also have an open mind around the organizations you're interested in working in. Because higher education, financial services, medicine, tech, there are particular functions and roles that are the most visible and salient roles that define the industry. So for example, when I joined Amazon, people were like, you're a Black man in tech. And I'm like, I'm definitely not in the tech part of the business. I am in retail, supply chain, and operations. And trust me, most of these gadgets, this is being recorded, they don't work that great, but that's neither here nor there. We still delight our customers. So I think with regard to say more specifically, you know, when I was at Northeastern, I had never imagined myself being a DEI professional, but I had done so many things around kind of racial justice, social justice more broadly, diversity and equity, and I was developing preliminary skills that would then be really useful for what's one of the most popular industries that's growing as of late. And when I think about some of the experiences I had in higher education, it actually ended up being super duper useful within the context of some of the work that I do within corporate America. So in a higher education setting, particularly a residential setting, they're focused on sourcing talent and recruiting talent. That talent just happens to be students. Employee resource groups are quite similar to student groups. So when you're developing skills around advising, leadership development, maturing those organizations, you would go through a similar kind of life cycle with employee resource groups. When you think about the kinds of cultural experiences that you want to offer to people in an organizational context, universities are doing that all the time when they're thinking about both educational opportunities, both experiential opportunities, and we're trying to build that within the context of corporate America to take more responsibility for the fact that it's not simply that people just show up to work and just get things done. People also have higher expectations for the kinds of cultures that they're expecting to enter into in the workplace. So now that I'm looking back on it, I can see particular kinds of threads. And I think that what really kind of helped me was seeing people who were doing that kind of bridge work around moving between different industries. So when I was a DEI consultant, we would talk a lot about unexamined biases, whether in hiring and promotions. And there is quite a lot of ample research around discrimination based on race and gender, but another way in which it's not the order of magnitude of discrimination necessarily, but the ways in which bias happens in jobs is also around industry bias, in the sense of, if you don't have a financial services background or you don't have a healthcare background, why would you be in this industry? And what we have to distinguish is that what are the kind of core functions and roles where it's important for someone to quote unquote have grown up in that industry, and then what are some of those other functions that exist within the organization that are transferable and exist across industries. Like, most organizations are assemblies of humans. And then when you look at prevailing disparities across the United States, many industries, whether it's health, insurance, law, education, medicine, have similar kinds of issues when we think of leadership representation and underrepresentation, who are in the lowest ranks. So a lot of organizations see themselves as kind of special snowflakes when many of the organizations are just manifesting societal level and systemic dynamics. So how do we as DEI practitioners figure out how to kind of pull that ball of yarn to create more equitable and inclusive organizations more broadly? So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Absolutely, thank you. I think what I want to do is open things up, and I think we're a small enough group to just stay together. I'd love to invite you to share your video if you feel comfortable to do that, but I want to start opening it up to anyone who's here to ask a question.
Great to see everyone.
I'll ask a first question. Laurie Bishop, Alumni Relations, work with Michelle, for those of you who are on the call that I didn't meet before. If all or some of you can answer this, how has Northeastern helped you after you graduated in your career path? Have you stayed connected? Were you away a bit and then got reconnected, or have you tried to stay connected in some way since you graduated?
I'm happy to kick us off. So at IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, we have a pretty robust program for having co-ops. Currently with COVID, we had to take a pause on the program, but I do have to say, I was a co-op, I came back as a co-op, I've managed and supervised probably 3 or 4 of our co-ops. That's been kind of the biggest tie for me to stay in tune with Northeastern, but then also I think there's a few others from CSSH on the line. My human services program was quite small, I think for the size of Northeastern, probably around 80 to 100 people, so you could recognize faces. But I think the really cool thing was when I was in the program, at first when I started, I thought, okay, if I'm in human services, I'm either gonna get my MPH or I'm gonna get an MSW, I'm gonna be a social worker. Those are my 2 paths. But seeing the way that people specialized and went into the world really opened my eyes. And so I realized there's a lot of people in Northeastern who we might have had the same major or the same college, but we're doing vastly different things. So just kind of jumping back to what Shane said, like meeting Shane, Cassie, and like Zach, I'm like, wow, even me as alumni on the panel, I'm like, I'm learning so much from you all because there's parts of Northeastern that are changing right now and parts that are staying the same. So it's just really interesting how I've stayed plugged in through the alumni network, but also my home program has been really great about keeping alumni in touch.
Zach, Shane.
It's funny, about almost a year ago to the day, I did a panel that Michelle invited me to. Sharing that panel got me reconnected with my manager who from my co-op, who is now my direct supervisor at this job that I have now. And he was like, that connection brought me into a major step forward in my career, both in terms of responsibility and compensation and advancement, and like put me on an entirely different path than I thought I was going to be looking for about a year and a half ago. So I think it kind of circles back to what Cassie and Rima had talked about taking risks, and Shane touched on as well about like staying in the group of the environment of these either student organizations or professional organizations, and continuing to just sort of raise your hand and say, yeah, sure, I'm happy to speak on a panel, or I'm happy to be part of that discussion. And the downstream effects of that are always really interesting.
So when I was a Northeastern nursing student, I thought that like nurses were either became nurse practitioners, stayed as bedside nurses, became professors because our professors were nurses, or like went into administration, like were nurse managers. And so I was like, I'm gonna come back and be a Northeastern professor because I love Northeastern. And then about a year and a half ago, one of the Northeastern like venture capital club members reached out to me, found me through LinkedIn, and like we started chatting, and he was like, oh, like you should get connected back with the alumni office, because they should know like that you like moved on from nursing and started a company and all these like really interesting things. And I've like thrown myself back into the Northeastern community because I really believe that nurses are so ripe for innovation, entrepreneurship, and I love getting nurses involved and Northeastern involved in the entrepreneurship community. And so I have a Northeastern intern with me right now. That venture capital club participated in our last fundraising round. And so I love participating in Northeastern. I have a few mentors through Northeastern. I mentor a few students at Northeastern. And so I'm really involved now back with Northeastern, but for a while I wasn't, and I regret that time away.
I wanted to ask those that joined us today too, if you have questions as well as challenges or issues that you would like the panel to speak to.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Sophie. I've worked at my nonprofit for the last 5-6 years since I've graduated from Northeastern in 2015. And I've run a K2 to 8th grade youth program, and it's run by college and high school students. And so I've been really loving what I've been doing in the space and creating that safe space for them to like be themselves. And a lot of them, what I've realized is they just don't have any adults that believe in them, so it's been really hard to kind of step away from this role. But with the upcoming new year, I really want to step out of my role and maybe either explore different organizations or corporate settings. And what Shane was saying, kind of like how Amazon was able to be that space for him while still retaining some of the other parts that he kind of went to Northeastern for. Do you guys have any advice for someone who's trying to break out of the nonprofit world, kind of exploring different things, and somebody kind of like a recruiter looking at my resume like, okay, this girl has been working as a manager at a nonprofit for the last 5-6 years. How can we incorporate her into our org or business? So yeah, sorry, that was a really long question.
Girl, startups. There are startups doing what you're doing, like monetizing mentorship. Like you got to do a little bit of research, but like this exists. And also like I think like Shane said, like my passion for like mentoring founders, I like use like my work to build my skill set to like create the life of like making space for that too. But I think like if that's like your passion, and like what pisses you off about the world is that people don't believe in like young people, like find the company of people who also are pissed off about that problem and want to solve that. And your skills are absolutely transferable around that, but like do the work of like finding that to be your life. But startups are great for that. If you want to do startups, it's its own beast.
Oh, one thought. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, so one thing about helping with the transferring. So I know one of the experiences that helped facilitate my transitioning from higher education to consulting was that I had already done some consulting part-time through this other organization that enters into conversations around diversity through a focus on socioeconomic class status, because oftentimes there's the thoughts around, religious diversity, gender, and race, and those are conversations that are very important and still need to happen. But I think that class consultation gave me a broad survey of different organizations, another lens in which to enter diversity inclusion conversations, and those were some of the experiences that I could kind of map onto some of the experiences that I had as far as higher education. And then the other thing to think about with nonprofits, generally speaking, is that oftentimes can overlap with corporate social responsibility arms within corporations. So identifying those organizations that might be, if you think of, some of your peer organizations in the nonprofit space, if they have corporate sponsors, checking out some of those opportunities and seeing if there are any openings that might begin to kind of open the door, so to speak. And then in the absence of either consulting or substantive experience, I still think it's super duper worthwhile to engage in networking with different people. So for example, how I actually when I was thinking of transitioning from DEI, from higher education to DEI consulting, a person I was working closely with on a project was a person who was based within a DEI consulting firm where they were working with the institution I was working with as an outlier to their typical client portfolio. Most of their portfolio was tech companies and financial services and Hollywood. So when I looked at the website for the organization, they had an open consulting position of which I applied and then got to the finalist round. And then one of my friends ran into a DEI consultant randomly enough at Busboy and Poets in DC and said, oh, you should talk to him, just get to know him. So I sent him a LinkedIn request, asked to talk to him. He sent me his number in 45 minutes. And then we ended up having a 3-hour conversation about my aspirations and the like. And he said, you should actually consider the firm that I work for. And I thought, I looked at the website and it was giving me 1990s DEI, and it was frankly, hopefully you don't see this recording. I love y'all. I came there anyway. At the time I thought, I was like, I'm not a good fit for this firm. It doesn't have the kind of, it's not a fast company. It doesn't have the same kind of, just verve that I was really attracted to with the other company. But what the person told me to do is, how about this? Just come down to Maryland and then let me introduce you to people so you can just get to know the firm. And I said, I can actually agree to that. So I took a trip down, stayed with my little sister, asked her to drop me off. And then she coincidentally said, you want me to bring you to my office? I can't lie and say I'm a big brother who knows what his sisters do. I just know that they're employed. So I was quite confused when she initially said, oh, take me to your office. And I said, you're definitely not a DI consultant. This doesn't make sense. Turns out the building was a multi-floor building and her office is on the 5th floor and the consulting company is on the 8th floor. So talk about serendipity. Any case, ended up having this meeting with the managing partner and the person I had talked to for several hours, and we had a wide-ranging conversation that lasted hours. At the end, they said they had no jobs. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not running screaming for my job. I'm trying to facilitate this transition. Come to find out, the managing partner was actually in the process of buying the company from the founder. So the reason they had no jobs was because the company was going to be evaluated and audited and there was going to be a hiring freeze. So essentially after I left the space, she told the guy that I talked to say, keep him where he is as long as possible, because as soon as I get through this purchase, I'm snatching him back. So you never know what's going to happen from some of these networking conversations. So I say network, send people messages on LinkedIn, see where there are some threads and connections. And then what you really just want to spend some time doing is thinking through how do you link those connections, because some of the role and industry biases that people are going to have are going to make it super hard for them to comprehend how A connects to G, and you can kind of fill in some of that gap around how you make meaning of your own experiences.
And just a tip on reaching out on LinkedIn, one of the things that always works for me, and I never say no to a conversation, is people are like, oh, I saw your LinkedIn. I'd love to just learn how you made your career transition, and can we just grab coffee, and I just love to learn how you navigated your career, or, made this transition from A to B. I never say no, because would love to help them do the same. And I've done that same reach out to other people, and it works.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions people want to ask? Well, and there's still room to jump in anytime. I just want to ask the panelists, what are the things you're thinking about when you look forward, and what's next?
Next. Well, I'm thinking that particularly for my career trajectory as of now, some of the ways that people can move in a company that's as big as Amazon is that you could either do DEI in a particular part of the business. So I know I'd be super curious about approaching DEI, for example, in Hollywood, because we have Amazon Studios. So that'd be an interesting next step for me. But the other next step could potentially be chief diversity officer leadership, or being someone's head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So leading at the executive level, that's what I imagine for the next step, which is definitely not something I imagine for myself coming out of Northeastern, because it would be really cool to be a part of a C-suite or to serve in a leadership role in that capacity for organizations. So that's one of the things I think of as far as career trajectory, or potentially just in addition to switching industries, just going to industries of different sizes, just to see how how that business model works, what comprises the culture, and what are some of their unique DEI challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Michelle, kind of to that question, given I've been at IHI for a few years now, I wanted to remind folks on here that, you know, within your organization, say you're searching for jobs, it's not working out, or maybe you don't want to leave your company, but you're tired of what you're doing, or you aren't seeing that much growth potential. I really encourage you to network also within your own company. Once again, depends how big or small, right? But assuming there probably are people who have left your company for other jobs or whatnot, I think it's still a really big opportunity to kind of sift their brains and like understand more, because the company is so much, if you look at a job role or job description, that's probably generally what you'll do, but there's probably wiggle room. You're already in the door at the company to modify, or maybe like find areas where you're saying, well, I think that there might be a weak spot here. Like, I think there might be a need for me or someone at the organization to kind of fill this in. And when you speak up those types of things, you can sometimes create roles for yourself at your current company. And I do have to say that because at IHI, I started off in co-op as like part of customer service. Realized didn't get much joy from customer service, but I saw a huge potential in other different roles within the company. When I came back after graduation, I started off in like project coordination, more of like a project coordinator role, then got promoted to project manager. And I was like, there seems to be more to this than just sending emails, answering calls, being on meetings. And then after doing a little bit more digging and actually advocating for projects I want to be on, I was able to like kind of craft my role, which was learning more about coaching, about how to build capacity within others, developing others, how to be like an advocate about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices within our projects, within our staff, and also kind of connecting the dots. And I love connecting people and connecting the dots. And that's not always something that I see as like a description on a job description for like project management. Like, do you connect the dots and coach people and do you develop others? Like, that's not typically like a project manager role. It's usually like manage the budget, you know, attend stakeholder meetings, like very like black and white step-by-step project management. But I've done so much more than that. Like I've had a chance to work with different community health organizations. I've worked with youth and youth networks from across the globe. I had a chance to go to like our Ethiopia office and like meet the full team, go to see the clinical sites in Ethiopia, things that I had never thought would happen from a co-op where I was doing customer service. And I was like, I don't want to do this, but kind of keeping your ears open, especially in times like COVID, say you just don't feel financially ready to switch gears and to jump ship, for lack of a better word. But, you know, there could be things that are right under your nose that maybe you just have to ask the right questions or talk to a few people outside of your team. Maybe that's like the business development team or the finance team, or even the HR, the people's team. Maybe there's stuff that you might find more joy in, but it's still within the same umbrella of your organization. So just wanted to put that note out there too.
Yeah, Rima, that's a really great point. Like what I said before, like if your manager doesn't bring it up, like the company should always be like doing this and like talking about like what your company's goals are, like what are the most important things for the organization. But if they're not, always be asking your manager, like what are the most important things for our team? Ask other managers, what are the most important things for your team? Ask your teammates, what are you, like other people in your company, what are you guys working on? And see, like, try to find like where your skill sets match those or where your interests match those. The Table Group is a really interesting consulting company. They do a lot of like leadership sort of consultancies. And one of the things that they do is called the Working Genius Assessment. And like, you can take this test, but basically what it does is it asks you questions of asking you like, what do you derive energy from? Like, what things do you do in your day that you get a lot of energy from? And mapping it to the things that you're actually good at. And sometimes it's really interesting that like some things that you're good at, you don't get a lot of energy from, and vice versa. And one of the things that I love doing is trying to map the things that people are good at to the things that give them energy, to the things that are strategically important to the company. And even if that means I have to move people across the team or someone that's on this team that should be a part of this other team's meetings, and that I love doing within our company. So that's one of the things that I love doing. And within my role, my job is to bring people into the company and make sure that everyone within the company is working on the right things and is in the right positions. But to Michelle's question of like, what's next, growing pair team. And then after that, coming back to Northeastern, Laura and I always joke about this. I have my eyes set on building out entrepreneurship and innovation within the School of Nursing. I'm very, very passionate about changing the healthcare landscape. And I think that the skills of nurses, assessment, implementation and reassessment are so really like prime for innovation. There's lots of doctors in innovation. We need nurses to do that. And I think Northeastern is really good at breeding innovators, as you can see here. And I'm sure a lot of you guys on the call are thinking this way as well. And so we need to bring more nurses into that. And so that is, what I want to do next. Yes, Shane, that's it. The Working Genius. There's a whole podcast about this too. Fascinating.
I don't know if I'm thinking so expansive.
Oh, go ahead, Zach.
Go ahead, Shane.
So one thread I just wanted to pull on very quickly is around kind of manager relationships. I think that when you, in any organizational environment, you obviously have a supervisor, or hopefully have a supervisor. Some startups can be an adventure, and major organizations can also be adventure. But all of that to say is that it's also important to think about one skill that's really important for the workplace is also managing up, because I forget which survey it was. Maybe it was Survey Monkey. They did a survey of managers, and over 50% of managers have not been trained to be managers, do not feel confident in their abilities. And I don't remember this statistic, but they asked people, would you trust a stranger over your manager? And a shockingly high number of people in most professional workplaces would trust a random stranger on the street over their managers. So all that to say, it's also important to think about managing up. So how do you make sure to, develop the kind of confidence and skill to ask for the things that you need? Right now in the sort of US environment, it really incentivizes people who are kind of individualistic and extroverted. So for anyone who comes from a culture where you operate with a great deal more humility and collectivism, it's not to say that that's bad. It's just to say that we have to meet society right where they're at, but ensure that you're not losing out on opportunities. So it's really important to kind of really be able to speak up, keep close and careful track of your work product and successes and areas of growth, because sometimes your managers, depending on their own approach or lack thereof, or the scope of the number of people that they have as direct reports, may not actually be keeping some of that in mind. So some of that advance notice can be super duper helpful in helping you navigate your career, and then also how you bridge some of those networks within the organization in the instance that you have a challenging manager, so that way you can kind of facilitate some seamless moves without much impact to your career development and your own desire for pace and progress within your trajectory.
I think it's a super important point, what Shane is talking about, and it actually kind of dovetails into what I was going to say, which is that the companies I've worked for in my career have all been going through high change, high velocity movements one way or another every time I've worked there. And the thing that has often made those very chaotic, insane environments a lot more tolerable is when I've had a manager that has been a really strong advocate on my behalf, or somebody who has reached out and said, like, take my hand, we're like, let's go. Like, how do I both help you get your work done, but also make sure that your career is beyond this role? And finding those people in your professional life and staying connected with them, especially if they do leave your organization or if you move beyond them within the organization, is really, really important. Especially if you're no longer in that manager direct report relationship, they can become really, really good advocates and confidants within your professional life when they're no longer the one who's necessarily doing your evaluations at the end of the year. Like, those people become, when they know you, more than just as a resource and as a recommendation that they can make on your behalf, can be really, really strong, and help you through not so great relationships with other managers, if that, because that's the reality, is that not everybody is going to be this spectacular shepherd of a professional resource. There was one year that I reported to 10 different people over the course of 1 year, because it was such a high turnover, crazy year at that company. And it was wild. But I had like a couple really good ones in there as well. Yeah. Except at, 40, 45, 60 people or so in total. I basically reported to a bunch of different people.
Yeah, and Zach, what you just kind of shared also like reminded me about, you have your supervisor, you have your manager, right? But you also can have those, what you said, like mentors, confidants, like people who have your back, but they aren't listed as your supervisor, I think is so key. And at IHI, like when we do our annual, I guess you could say like performance development, you are able to like say, hey, like, could you please get feedback from like 6 to 10 people? And they don't always have to be like, they shouldn't be your supervisor and the people you work with every single day. They could be like faculty members or subject matter experts, people who you collaborate with. Maybe they're even like, I wouldn't be surprised if some people said like a partner or a subcontractor who their company has worked with, just because like there's so many other places too. Cause like, yes, work is for a lot of us like a huge chunk of our work weeks, but you also need to make sure like you have those pillars outside of your workplace, because especially in like risky times like now, like some people don't feel comfortable or have the financial advantage to be able to move and make these big career shifts. And that might mean you're doing something freelance or you're working for another organization in a different capacity than like your 9-to-5 job, as a typical coin word. But I think like you can still bridge those networks and keep on like with your LinkedIn messaging, and as much as you reach out to others, do what Cassie suggested, which is not the typical message of, hi, I'm interested in learning about project management. Like that's like, think how many times people probably receive those messages, or hi, like I'm a nurse, I am looking for another like nursing gig. And it's like, okay, that's helpful, but let's get a little bit more in depth. So doing your research the same way that you would for a job, I think is really helpful for networking, like putting that same effort in. That's probably how much effort and value you'll get out from the conversation. So just remembering that, whether it is an actual interview versus like you're just grabbing coffee with someone, but it could turn into so much more from everything you've heard from like Cassie and Zach and Shane.
This is such rich insight and observations and wisdom from your own paths. We have 5 minutes left. Anything else that people want to ask, or any other things you want to share? I was actually curious as to ask about how things that you enjoy doing outside of work, like how does that fit into the picture for you? Is it separate? Does it sustain you at work, or has it created other connections, anything like that?
Well, actually,
go
ahead, Rima.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say my work that's been pro bono with Fueling Justice Coalition. I've been doing that for a little bit under a year now. It's interesting, when I was first approached about like, would you like to be the marketing director? I thought, well, I barely have time for myself. Like, how am I going to do this as like, helping? And when I said yes, and everything you shared, Cass, at the beginning was ringing in my head, I was like, I want to say no, but I said yes. It opened up like a breadth of like 20 to 25 young professionals across every single different field. I work with them like on a weekly basis. Sometimes we just have informal chit chats, like just to get stuff off the ground, since we're still applying for a nonprofit status. But saying yes to that, I thought it was going to decrease my time, but it increased the value in like my networking, and my ability to find joy and energy in things outside of my work life has been instrumental. So I could only imagine if I really wanted to like network and start like looking for other jobs, like there's a huge group of people right there I can already tap into because we have this common connection. Go ahead, Shane. What were you going to say?
So I'm an avid reader. So that's fun. One of the things I walked away from the screen because there's this great book called The Pocket Guide to Making Successful Small Talk. It's like $82 on Amazon, but in lieu of that, there's this great PDF. So I oftentimes read lots of books on leadership, behavioral economics, wealth inequality, structural oppression. And sometimes my friends are thinking, Shane, why do you read such intense books? And then actually I find it, one, just interesting, but also it gives me lots of different ways to talk about these conversations, because, you can't necessarily talk to sixth graders and say, we're going to talk about, patriarchy and heterosexism. You're not going to use those exact languages. You would use some plainer language. So I think it allows me to be super duper versatile with regard to communicating. But the other advantage too is that when we go through really difficult periods, like earlier this year with the violence against Asian American women, or last year with George Floyd, I find that, okay, I'm equipped with this vocabulary and some of the skill sets to help facilitate processes for groups to kind of move through these difficult experiences. So even though my friends make fun of me for just the content of what I read, I think it offers a really good refuge to engage with difficult content in different ways to continue to build my stamina. So that way, when I'm needed to provide some of that leadership during those larger difficult experiences, I can do that work. So that's one way in which my work bleeds into my personal life, bleeds into my professional life in really valuable ways. But I highly encourage people to actually have much better self-care practices than I do.
Go ahead, Zach.
I don't know if I have a save the world story. I like to cook, and I think I take a lot of satisfaction in cooking, and especially in the last year and a half, trying to improve my skills in something that I have no formal training in. But it has been a really good stepping off point for the types of conversations that I have with people that I work with. I work at a company that actually just shut down their office to go fully remote going forward. So we're all spread out across the US. That got me invited in to be part of like an internal group of people focused on company culture and fostering company culture at this organization. And one of the things we're trying to do is like put together an employee cookbook and get it printed and have that be a thing that we share this holiday season. So I think there are ways that your passions can either drive to help do more of the save the world at a macro or micro scale, like what Rima and Shane are doing, but it also can just help from a cultural aspect within the organizations that you could do work at, which helps lead into a lot of these other networking types of things. People are a lot more willing to stick their neck out with recommendations and things like that when they get to know you and like you as a person. That's not to say that cooking is the way to do it, but it's those shared experiences are good for building on that.
Hi, Shane. I think of myself as a battery, and I always just try to keep tabs of where my battery is at, and I have a tab of things that will refill my battery. Like Pilates shuts my brain off and I just count, and so it will refill my battery. Real Housewives refills my battery, just shuts my brain off, and my brain's like always going. So cooking refills my battery in my body. So yeah, some of that stuff.
Well, thank you all. This has been such a rich conversation. I feel energized myself from all that you've said and thinking about how does this apply to me? How can I use these ideas? Just really wonderful different perspectives. I love that you reflect a lot of different industries and experiences. And I'm so grateful to you as alums. You said yes to me. That's the yes I really like to hear. Your willingness to come back. I've interviewed some of you for articles. Anyway, I really appreciate your being role models to us and your involvement with Northeastern and sharing your expertise. And thank all of you that joined us today. There is a session coming up on November 5th. I think it's either 12 to 1 or 1 to 2 that is going to be about changing career direction. That'll be some emails going out about that next week. Encourage you to look at NUSource, our networking platform that gives you access to 5,000 alumni. And so we hope to see you at some other programs. Again, thank you for all of us and enjoy applying these ideas. Thanks,
Don't
everyone.
reach out to anyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.